Hey guys, I have a nice instructive video in store for you. There's a dynamic opening choice in this game we're going to dive into. It's the Scotch game. We're going to see a rare move order by black with a quick queen trade that can lead to some interesting imbalances like our double pawns a strength or a weakness, extra space for one side, and then we're going to see an exchange sacrifice and some tactical fireworks leading into the endgame. So we'll go through all the key moments, the educational takeaways, the tactics, the strategy, the endgame. It's all coming up. So let's dive right into the game. I'm playing the white pieces, and here we have what's called the Scotch game. And now this is the first rare move, queen to f6. And the idea is if you play knight to b5, which is what I played in the game, the most aggressive move, threatening knight takes c7 fork, there's bishop c5. Counter threat of queen takes f2 checkmate. But in this case, I have queen to f3. So this offers the queen trade. It's accepting doubled pawns. Now, what I want you guys to learn from this move is don't always take the rules that we learn as beginners as the gold standard, right? So in this case, black is doubling my pawns, but these double pawns are not weak. And actually, this pawn just came closer to the center. So this is going to help strengthen my center. And in a couple of moves, this is going to become very apparent why this is good. So bishop to b6 played, defending against the knight takes c7 fork. Bishop to e3, and now it's getting a little uncomfortable for black because I'm threatening bishop takes b6, followed by knight to c7. Now I'm bringing on the eval bar so we can see point 3 for white. Bishop takes e3 played, f takes e3. Now look at how the pawns on f2 and g2 just moved up. They're now on f3 and e3. So those pawns are moving up towards the center. King to d8 played. It's the only way to defend that pawn now. Knight 1 to c3, and this threatens knight to d5, followed by one of the knights capturing c7. So a6 played. Knight d4. And now one of the strongest moves is knight takes d4, which was played in the game. But you can feel the advantage now increasing for white. Look at this big pawn center. d4 and e4, defended by the pawn on f3, and look at black's pawns. All of the pawns are on the 7th rank, except the pawn on a6. So that's why we're seeing a 0.7 eval, even though it's very close to an endgame already. We only have 4 pieces each. Typically an endgame is 3 pieces each or less, but we're very close to an endgame, and black doesn't have any compensation for this big pawn center. Pawn to d6 played. Rook to g1, so developing the rook with the tempo on the pawn. g6, and queenside castle. So white's also up in development. So more center space up in development. Sometimes these advantages can fizzle out though, so we have to look to keep increasing the advantage before black's able to figure out how to develop all of their pieces. f4, grabbing more space, and what I would like to do with these pawns is at some point push the pawns up and create problems for black, but I didn't see a way to do it yet, so I'm not going to rush. Every pawn push is committal. That's something to remember, and we're going to see some pawn pushes in this game that lead to large weaknesses and also large advantages. Knight to f6 played, and I think an idea for black here is to play pawn to d5, trying to target my e4 pawn, and if I push past, then knight to h5, and all of a sudden the pawn on f4 becomes a big weakness because it's stuck there, it can't push forward, and it's hard to defend it. So I played bishop to d3, just playing solid, improving my last couple pieces. So I improved that bishop. I would like to improve this rook, and then look to do something in the center. Rook to e8 played, and now here I did miss a good break, pawn to f5. I looked at it briefly, but I didn't appreciate that it actually wins a pawn by force after bishop to c4. And the idea is if black takes here, there's rook d to f1, hitting the bishop with the knight behind it, so that would lose a piece for black. And the threat of bishop takes f7 is really strong in combination with maybe a rook dropping down to g7, a move like rook to f8 here, rook g7, bishop e8, is so passive that the computer is essentially saying white is just crashing through here and winning this position. So black could try to hold on to the pawn as long as possible, but eventually he's going to drop something. It's probably going to be the h pawn after the knight's trade. So going back to the game, instead of f5, I played rook d to e1, and then c5 is played. This is a positional mistake by black. I was looking to push these center pawns anyways. The problem with c5 is once you push the pawn up here and d5 is played, now there's this lone pawn for black on d6 trying to slow down my e pawn. And with this e pawn coming up, that's going to be a huge problem for black. So bishop to d7 played. And now I played pawn to e5. And these pawns are super strong all of a sudden. The pawns on d5 and e5. And I'm trying to create a passed pawn here. I would love to play e6, attack that bishop, force it back. This pawn on d5 trades for the pawn on f7. It's just going to be a big advantage. So knight h5 played. Good move, going for counterplay. Knight takes f4 threatened. And now here, I played rook g to f1. Knight to e4 might have been even stronger, ignoring the threat of knight takes f4, knowing that I have knight takes d6, hitting the rook, the pawn, no fun for black. But I played rook f1 and then f5 played. So notice how both of these pawn moves for black, c5 and f5, have actually strengthened white's pawn center. Because now this pawn on e5 is going up to e6. And that's going to be a super strong square for the pawn. It's going to force that bishop back. And this protected passed pawn, so it's guarded by another pawn. It can never be kicked. It can never be traded off by a pawn, opposing pawn. It's going to be there forever. And passed pawns pose problems in the endgames. That's something that we talked about in a previous video. I want you guys to really remember that passed pawns pose problems. So now I played bishop to e2. The reason for this, instead of playing e6 right away, is with e6 right away, the black knight can head back to f6. And I think that's the strongest square for the knight, because from there it could maybe head to e4, maybe g4. It pressures the pawn on d5. So he's just a really good knight there. What I'm doing is I'm attacking that knight first. And black doesn't want me to take because it would shatter these kingside pawns. And when he retreats, now I play e6. I put that knight on a clumsy square and then play e6. So the knight can still get to f6, but it's going to take two moves. It'll probably have to go through e8 and then out, or maybe h5 and then back. Bishop c8 played. Very passive square for the bishop. So now I play a4. Now this is kind of a slow play move, but the idea is for black to get counterplay, he would love to play pawn to b5. Just expand on the queen side. a4 is shutting that down because now we see three pieces attacking that b5 square. Black only has one defender at b5. So it's not very easy at all for black to get b5 in without sacking a pawn. So he goes b6. Now I play h4. This is another key takeaway for you guys to learn from. The plan here with h4 is to play active. You want to play active in endgames. I want to play pawn to h5, open up these pawns, and use the h and the g files for my rooks. So that's the idea. h5, even if it's a pawn sacrifice, play for activity, and it's going to cause problems for black. Rook g8 played, h5. And if, let's say, knight takes h5 played, that's a mistake. After bishop takes, g takes, rook h1, these pawns are all falling very quickly, and the black pieces over here aren't in the game at all. So knight e8 played, heading to that strong square f6. Knight to d1. My idea here is I would love to play c4 and defend the pawns with other pawns. The problem with using pieces to defend pawns is this knight is now stuck being passive, right? So picture a black knight on f6 and a black bishop on b7. Notice how both of those pieces attack the pawn on d5. So if I'm stuck with a bishop on f3 and a knight on c3 defending, my two minor pieces are passive, they're playing defense, and black's two minor pieces are active and they're playing offense. It's not a situation I want. So I retreat this knight so that after knight f6, I can put the knight on e3 and plan to play c4 next. So that's the idea here. Pawn to b5 by black, pawn sacrifice, but he's also playing active. So first I exchange on g6, and then take on b5. Computer says it might even be better to simply play rook h1, make sure that I control the h file, and ignore the b pawn completely. Allow black to capture on a4. So that's kind of interesting. Takes, takes. One pawn up now for white, but is it enough to convert? Bishop to b5, threatening this guy, and there's c4. So that mission has been accomplished. Pawns defending pawns in the center. Now, here's a key takeaway for you guys. When you have one advantage in a position, look to create a second advantage, because then you can use the two advantages to play off each other. This is also true of creating multiple threats. So if you have one threat in the position, try to create two. And weaknesses. If your opponent has one weakness, try to give them a second weakness. Play them off each other, right? You want to stay agile, keep your opponent guessing, keep giving them tough decisions. So that's what I'm doing here. I already have the advantage of the super strong protected pass pawn. It's only 2 squares away from queening. That's very difficult to deal with. What's the second advantage going to be? Can I control the H file and bring my rook in? King e7 played, king c2. The knight comes up, rook g1, and I'm not immediately jumping on the H file, but I think in hindsight I probably should have. There's really no reason not to do it. So black gets his king in good position. It looks like white's a little bit stuck in terms of counterplay, but I had an idea here. I played knight to g4 check. So I knew my rook was guarding the knight, and I knew f6 was a nice square for the king. With knight to g4 check, if f takes g is played, rook takes e4, I just eliminated black's strongest piece, and I got rid of my knight, which was just playing defense on e3. Right, so backing it up a couple, look at these two knights. The knight on e4 is stronger than knight on d4. So, knight g4 I think is a nice tactical shot. King g7 played. And now, king to d3. And this is threatening rook takes e4, exchange sacrifice. This is something that I've been working on in my own games. It's one of my takeaways that I carry across games. In the past, I have focused way too much on material values. And I'm actually starting to come around to think that maybe when we teach new players chess, we need to be very careful about creating some of these rules, like double pawns always weak, material always good. We need to teach beginners to balance some of these rules with things on the position, right? So in this case, yes, rook takes e4 is giving up a 5-point piece for a 3-point and a 1-point piece. So it's a loss of 1 point. But black's rooks are not very active at all here, and eliminating that strong knight in the f5 pawn, I think makes the win even easier for white than the current position. So bishop a6 played, knight e3, knight to f2 check, drop the king back, knight h3, and this is a critical moment. If you want to pause the video, go ahead and find what should white play in this position. One move stands out above everything else. So the answer is knight takes f5 check. It's a better version of the exchange sacrifice. After the king moves, there's only one reply, knight takes d6. Chess.com gives it a brilliant symbol, because now after knight takes g1 check, rook takes g1, that was 5 points for 5 points. Look at the center. White has 3 pawns, and the important ones are really the d and e pawns, connected passed pawns, and they're all safe and nice and defended, and the black rooks aren't able to do anything at the moment. Bishop takes, knight takes. Black rooks really need to find activity fast. I think rook h8 is the most testing move, because I would love to get my rook open. Rook a2 was played. This gives me the chance to sacrifice the b pawn for more activity. I'm not going to put that rook on b1. It makes no sense because this rook will come in on the h file. So you want to keep looking to play active. There's a big advantage for white. Let's push this for the win. My rook wants to head down to h7 or h8. So rook takes b2, king moves. And here black threatens rook takes b5, followed by rook takes e5, which is a nice idea. That could be a way to hold the draw. If you're able to win knight and 2 pawns for a rook, that'll probably hold the draw. But I play rook h7 here. And now the problem is, look at the black king. Rook to f7 is threatened, and all of these squares are guarded by pawns. So the pawn guards this rook, the rook guards these, the pawn guards This pawn guards that, this pawn guards this and this, the rook guards this, the black pawn's here. What do you know? It's a checkmate net. So the black king is in a mating net. He played rook takes b5 in the game, and I got the checkmate. Clocks were a little bit low, which led to that mistake. But the problem for black here is, let's say rook f8 is played. Now knight to d6 could be played, threatening pawn to e7, hitting the rook and then queen. And if black drops the rook back, we still go for it, win the exchange, and then a move like f5 is just crushing tactically. There's no rook takes e7 because it's a losing king in pawn endgame. And if pawn takes king over, the problem now is this king cannot march this way. So he has to go the other way. Pawn to d6, can even sack the rook, bring the king in, and these two pawns win the game. So if we want to recap here what happened, we have the importance of understanding some opening principles and nuances in the Scotch game. So there were some kind of unique challenges for both sides with the queen trade, and then understanding the value of imbalances, right? So we had those doubled pawns and the big center for white, the power of active pieces throughout the game. Always look for active moves, active counterplay, and then endgame technique. Passed pawns pose problems. If you guys can remember that, that's going to be one of the biggest things for you to do in the endgames to convert your wins and to hold your draws. And then the last thing is creating multiple threats or weaknesses because they can complement each other. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment and let me know what you thought. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.